and welcome to the first podcast for 2021. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and this is the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. So I wanted to start this year, or this first podcast session, and sort of change the format a little bit from what I've done in the past. And I thought I'd try and give you guys a visualization of what I suppose I'm looking at and what I want to go through in this podcast. And on the pump up trolley, which you would have seen from the photos on Instagram or Facebook in front of me, I've got a nice little Shimpaku Juniper. It's maybe about 45 centimetres tall, got a nice little twisty trunk, still in development, so very common for a lot of people, this sort of tree. And that's why I suppose I chose it for this podcast, because I want to have it as something that everybody can relate to and can associate with, and have some kind of a link with. As I look around the tree, it's quite shaggy. It hasn't been worked on for 12 months. There's still a couple of fertiliser bags on top of the pot, so I'll put those into the bin now. Time to go. So here it's in Melbourne, Australia. We're in February, so the last month of our summer period. Can't say it's been an exceptionally hot summer this year. In fact, it's been quite humid, if anything else. And there's been lots of growth on the tree, so this juniper is looking quite shaggy. I look at the wiring on the tree too. It was wired last year, and there's a few spots where it's starting to cut in, which is not a bad thing for the tree. And I'll explain that a little bit later on. But as I spin the tree around on the table, there's lots of new growth on this thing. Lots and lots of new growth. Everywhere I look, there's the little seeds that they can develop sometimes, which I like to remove. But there's lots of new foliage. But the pads all look shaggy. I can see where I've got the pads, the apex, everything looks like it's in the right position because it was set that way last year. But now it looks a bit dishevelled, like your hair on a Sunday morning after a big Saturday night. You get out of bed, look in the mirror, and geez, I've had a good night. So that's what the tree looks like. It just looks a bit shaggy. So I wanted to run you through, I suppose, the process that I follow or that I work with on a tree like this, which is absolutely 100% in development, and a long way from being in the refined stage. So it's a tree for all of us. Anyone involved in bonsai will have trees like this, whether it's a Shimpaku like this one is, or whether it's a needle juniper or whatever it is. You're going to have something come across your bench which needs to take the next step in the right direction, and sometimes it can be a bit daunting, and when it's a bit daunting, you might put it to the side and not do it. Whereas I think it's probably far better to do something than nothing, as I say quite a lot. So first up, I'm just you'll hear me hopefully in the background cleaning my tools. So I like to do this on a very regular basis. Every time I work on a tree, make sure I've got some very sharp and very clean tools that will make the job as efficient as possible. Don't like dirty tools. Don't like things that I've worked hard to acquire looking like they're second rate. And I love when my tools are nice and sharp. So just going to give the blades on the scissors a quick clean, quick sharpen, and then I'll be ready to get into it. I like sharpening almost every time that I work with the tools as well, to make sure that they're kept in a pristine condition. It's nice and sharp now, and if they're kept in a nice clean state, then I'll keep coming back to them. So what I'm looking at first is I've spun the tree around. There's a little bit of dieback on the inside of the pads, which again is quite normal for Shimpaku at this time of the year. From aging scale foliage, but also because the sunlight can't get through. Now, as I look through the pads, I can see that they're pretty full. The first thing you'll hear me starting to work with the scissors now. I'm starting at the apex of the tree. When I clean my trees, I start at the tops and work my way down. And I always start with cleaning the underneath side of the pads. If you look at if you think about the ability for sunlight to get through some of your foliage or some of the pads on the tree, then to make it possible for sun to get in there, you need to remove foliage. Now, it would seem very logical to start the foliage removal process from the top of the pads, but I start underneath because I'm always going to be removing the foliage that comes underneath the pads. I want a very clean profile to the underneath side of my pads, so I have to remove that regardless. Now, you may have heard the old adage when it comes with junipers that you should never remove too much of their foliage in any one sitting because it'll cause the tree to revert to a juvenile foliage state, or worse, the tree may be set back and you could end up with possible dieback or death of the tree by taking too much foliage off. Junipers need the new foliage that they've got to draw nutrients from their roots up the tree. So I find that if I'm sparing with what I'm removing from the top of the pads, one, I keep a more natural feel to the pads. I don't like them, and this is personal for me. I don't like the pads on junipers when they look like they're perfect. I like them to have that real natural sort of look to them, which is a little bit rougher, I suppose, a little bit underworked than what they could be to make them absolutely 100% perfect. But that's a personal thing for me. But I like it more from a horticultural purpose, that by leaving them a little bit, not shaggy, but little less touched by me, they maintain more of a natural feel, but they also retain the new tips on their foliage, which they need to hold and maintain the strength that they have. The old foliage is nowhere near as efficient for them as what the new foliage is, and by constantly manhandling or pruning the foliage on top to make the pads seem perfect can be detrimental to the strength and integrity of the tree. So I like to purely work with that, that more naturalistic sort of a feel to the pads. So I'm going and removing the foliage underneath all of the pads around the tree, which can be quite time consuming, but it's very satisfying, because when you look at the tree afterwards, you'll find that it's got the pads are really clearly defined, and the structure of the tree, the timber, the framework, the branching underneath is very evident as well once you've cleaned underneath the pads. So it serves multiple purposes, and providing like I said, a really clear outline to what the structure of the tree that it has. I like to work on my junipers around this time, around summer, because there's not a hell of a lot left to be done around the yard. My natives, my Australian natives, they definitely need work at this time, but I've been through decandling with the pines, and it's time to let them rest. My deciduous have had their summer prune, so then I get to the point where my junipers, even though they could have been worked at other times of the year, they could have been worked earlier, well and truly. They can be worked later as well, but I find that because I've got that little bit of a lull, a bit of downtime in my schedule for my work on the trees, that I can devote myself to junipers. It's like anything. I personally find that highly repetitive nature of working on trees, on bonsai, it sort of comes to its own when you're doing the same species, over and over and over, because you'll get more efficient at it. You know what to look for. You don't follow the old cookie cutter approach where you're doing the same thing over and over to the trees so they all look the same. But your approach, your horticultural perspective on what you're looking at and what you're maintaining stays the same. So as you go from tree to tree, you're looking at the health of each of the trees, and because their characteristics and properties are very similar, you can assess them as a direct comparison between one to the other very quickly, and it makes you know when there's something wrong, because you'll see it straight away, but also lets you know when what you've been doing is working right. You also get to compare the natural characteristics of the tree, the genetics of the tree. Looking at the foliage quality of the different, for instance, Shimpaku, like this one is in front of me now. Some you get and they have magnificent foliage, very tight, very compact, everything that you really want on a bonsai. And others, the bark quality might be much better, but the needle quality, foliage quality is nowhere near as good. So you're sort of looking at one thing being sacrificed to another. There are options, of course. There's always grafting for these things, which is definitely a possibility. And if you look hard enough, you'll find it. But it's a really long road to go down. And I think that by making good choices when you're acquiring stock, looking at the foliage, not just the movement of a tree when you're buying it, but everything else that goes with it. If you get fine, delicate branches, you'll have good ramification on that tree going forward. If they're thick, coarse branches, then the growth and the ramification may not be as tight as what you'd envisage in the back of your head. And I'll say it again. Say it again. You'll spend as much time on a poor tree as what you will as on a good tree. So I think that making the right decision early days, right decisions also cost more money. So you've got to balance all of that out. But I think that by putting in the extra time needed to pick the right tree early on will pay massive dividends for you later on. You might not feel the benefit of it for 3, 4, 5 years, but when you do, you'll be happy. It'll make you you'll certainly forget how much you pay. Well, hopefully you certainly forget about the cost of the tree, and it's the enjoyment factor that that it gives you exactly what you'd hoped it would after all those hard years, those years of hard work that you've put into it. It's very, very satisfying, very rewarding. Now, I think of all the types of junipers, the scale Shimpaku Juniper are my favourite, and one of the favourites anyway. I really like their feel that they get. They wire well on that too. I'll say again, as I've said before in earlier podcasts, if you've just tuned in now, I don't believe you should be wiring anything that's green, especially on a juniper, because you run a really high risk of killing the branch. Where it's brown, I'll put a wire on it. Where it's green, it's a little bit new, and maybe not quite as, I use the term, insulated. Doesn't have enough layers of bark around it to protect it if the wire, or you're a little bit rough with your wiring, and it tends to break the branch. You'll find that in a few weeks' time, or a month's time, or less, more, you'll have a nice brown branch on your juniper. So I don't really, as a general guide, I don't use very light wires on my junipers. I won't wire every branch within an inch of its life. I'll do when I do shape the trees, I'll do the primary and I'll do the secondary, and that's it. I'll stop there, because I think that's sort of enough. I can, like I said, it may not be absolutely perfect the first time that I wire it, but I can get to where I want to with pruning, with clip and grow, and making sure that I'm selective about what buds I'm leaving where, and how I'm managing the growth and foliage on the tree. So if you do get something where for instance, you're looking at a very light, aluminium gauge. I wouldn't use anything under 1.5 mil for an aluminium gauge wire when I'm wiring a juniper, because I think that's when you're getting to a branch that may possibly not be thick enough to absorb any slight rough handling that I may inflict on the tree by accident. They do take really well to heavy bending on the trunks. If I was going to do that sort of thing, then I wouldn't be doing it now. I wouldn't be doing it in summer. I'd be tackling that task in the winter period. I think it's possibly more dormant then, although you do find that the junipers can pretty much grow 24/7. They don't generally tend to stop, which is why they're again perfect for bonsai. You can push a lot of growth out of them in a controlled manner, because they do have that almost continuous growth ability with them. So I like them. I reckon they're great. I do apply raffia when I'm doing big bends on them, because again, you may do some damage to the tree, and I find that extra layer of protection that the raffia provides can be well absorbed by the tree. I have had it actually on a different type scale juniper, where I've done some pretty big bending of vertical branches down to become hanging branches on the tree. I had to leave the raffia on there for quite a long time with the wire, also just to make sure that it fully set. That the raffia had actually held its form so much that it actually started to cut into the bark, which I didn't see, because I'd apply wet raffia, tie it on nice and tight, then put on a layer of tape over the top, and then after that I would put on some pretty heavy gauge copper, and then I would bend the branch using steel Rio bars or a jack or something like that. But, with this one, because the bend was significant, I didn't want to have to do it a second time. And when I removed all of the wire and then took the tape off, it was after probably, maybe 18 months. It was a big branch. The tree's not fast growing, so I thought it'd be all right. But the raffia had actually cut into all the bark, just as what a lighter gauge wire would have done. Not the end of the world, because now it's sort of 4 or 5 years down the track and you can't even notice where it was. But at the time, it looked quite significant. So it's just something to be mindful of with raffia, that I should have, in hindsight, removed the raffia and the wire a little bit earlier, and then reset a heavy wire just on the branch in direct contact with the bark, as opposed to being leaving the raffia on there as well. So looking around, I've probably done. You can hear all the clipping and all the rest of it. I've probably done maybe the top third of the tree now, and it's starting to look nice. So the process: clear the underneath side, as I mentioned earlier. Then I start to work on the top of the tree and the style of shape that I want of the pad, each of the pads. And I like to have them all as separate identities. So when I work on one pad, I do it in isolation of all the other pads. So it gives it more a feel of being disconnected but part of the same design. I've found that in the past, if I work on the pads, looking at them all at the same time and working them in conjunction with each other, then they can sort of blur together. And I like them being on different heights and different planes, and on the vertical and on the horizontal, so it all adds to interest. As you look around, there's lots of different pads at lots of different areas, whereas when I've got possibly a little bit too close to the design, and I'm looking at the overall, they can sort of blend together. And I find that instead of having, say, 3 pads in one area, I'll work it where I end up with one enormous pad, and and that's not what I want. Not for me anyway. It's my personal approach, but that's me. You'll hear too that there's a lot of scissor work. So far, it's all scissor work. I've got one hand in there managing and separating the growth, so I can get my scissors in there to make the cuts. And then there's no plucking, there's no pulling. It's all with scissor work. So I was taught, and I believe in the approach that you should try and make the cuts as surgical as possible. Try and make everything as clean as you possibly can. So then it's got the best chance to heal as quickly as it can. Also, when you're pinching things, you're smashing and ripping things off, and I've found that can sort of be quite stressful on the tree, and that's where you'll find, especially with junipers, especially scale junipers like this one, that doing too much too soon for it, you'll end up with the foliage reverting to a juvenile state. So it turns to like a needle type foliage, which is ugly. It's distracting, but it's also a red flag that you've possibly done the wrong thing to the tree and pushed it into a defensive state where it's now gone to defensive mode to say, I'm not producing mature foliage anymore. I'm going to stay in this state until I've recovered, and then I'll start going back to my normal foliage. From a bonsai owner's perspective, that's really bad, because you're setting the tree back rather than on a forward trajectory. When you see that juvenile growth, it's an indicator that you've possibly done it, or you have done the wrong thing, whether it's repotting out of time, whether it's too hard a root pruning, whether it's too hard a pruning, whether it's pinching the foliage and leaving it in a state where it's instead of repairing one cut from a site where you've removed a small branch to 20 different areas that you've pinched off when you've removed that same area, but you've broken it all the way through. It's a sign that you've definitely done the wrong thing, and you need to give the tree time to recover. Once that juvenile foliage starts to appear, you've just got to wait, and that's when I don't do anything. I put it into a really protective mode for the tree. It becomes, it's like it's in hospital until it recovers. So there's no more work on the tree. If you keep pruning and chasing your tail, removing the juvenile foliage, you'll find that it'll just keep spitting it out. So you just need to leave it and let the tree do what it's going to do. Then once it's finished with all of that, then you can go through and start pruning back and removing the juvenile foliage, which will have the new scale foliage right at the tip. So effectively you're going back further than where you were when the juvenile foliage first appeared. It's not pleasant, but it's a necessity when that sort of thing happens with your tree. So I'm about halfway down the tree now, and the top half's looking nice. It's nice to actually sit back and review your work and be satisfied. Take heart in what you've done. Whether I'm not just talking about the pruning work that I'm doing now, but I'm looking at the wiring and decisions that I made last year when I styled this tree, and the branches that I kept, the branches I removed, and I'm happy with it. It's nice. It's still a tree that draws me in and makes me interested. it's a long way off from being what I'd consider to be, in that finished state. But I'm very, very happy with it. Just had a look, and this tree looks like I first started this one back in 2010. I actually remember when I bought this, it was at a local club show, and it was in a black pot as a seedling, a little whip that had its trunk bent, and it was something about the foliage that grabbed me. Like I said, I'm a softie for the Shimpaku, and it was from a nursery that had grown it, that had put a lot of time into a little cutting, and it wasn't very much. I think it was only a few dollars. It was $20 or something like that for a 4 or 5 year old little whip that had training on it. So now it's 11 years down the track. Well, 11 years from that point. I remember when I first got it, I put into a grow pot to try and thicken the trunk and try and put a little bit more height on it, and that was my first interaction with this tree. Then it was developing the roots and the health of the tree and growing on from there. And now I'll put maybe a photo of this up on Instagram shortly, possibly in the next couple of days, to show you what it looks like. But it's like I said, it's not bad. It's a nice little tree. It's something that I think we could all have. Everyone's got one of these, or can potentially have a tree like this in their collection, and it's not a hard tree to maintain. It's not a hard tree to keep, and it's on the very rewarding side for bonsai ownership. You need to be careful with these things during the heat of summer. I find that they can dry out, and they are very, very slow in showing you when you've been neglectful in your care of the tree, because the foliage, unlike a deciduous tree, will not turn overnight. It won't droop when it needs water. You might find that you can see some kind of a colour change in it, but more often than not, you'll find that the tips will turn brown from neglect as one of the first things that they'll show you. But that, like I said, that can be well after the fact. So just be mindful that if you do forget to water them, and it's a hot day, and you come home and they're all nice and dry, and all the other trees have got crispy leaves, and you look over at the juniper and you go, "Oh, good on you, good thing, you're okay. You've made it." Well, maybe just make a mental note or jot it down in your diary that's happened. So when 6 months down the track or 3 months down the track, you look at the tree and branches have started dying, or foliage has changed colour, or something's happened to it, then you can sort of work your way backwards to what the root cause was to the issue, because it invariably will be coming back to that lack of continuity of care that it's paying you back for. Well, that you've inflicted on it to come and rear its ugly head. Nothing you can do about it once it's done, but learn from it. Work out maybe if there's a better way of managing your trees through summer. I mean, that's probably something that should be talked about. Is as you come out the other side of summer, you'll see your trees, and a lot of them will be exhausted. There's some of the trees will be getting ready already, and the deciduous trees starting to show the onset of autumn. I know that there's a massive orchard not far from where I live, and I noticed it just the other day that the apple trees there a lot of them have started changing colour with their foliage. We've been through the summer solstice now, so we're on the downhill slide, unfortunately. Well, fortunately and unfortunately towards winter, and the days are getting shorter, which means that the trees will invariably start getting ready for the winter dormancy, and that means that they'll start changing colour reasonably soon. I mean, we've only got 3 weeks left of the calendar summer, and then we'll officially tick over to autumn. And it seems to be the way it works here in Melbourne, particularly. The calendar ticks over and the weather pattern changes pretty soon thereafter. So it might be a purely a calendar date that we're working to, but it does seem to have an impact on our seasons as well. So if I don't get all of my junipers done at this time of the year, it's not the end of the world. I think it's the same every year on year, where I'll start working with the better trees that I want to get to a certain level, and then I'll start working down the collection to the trees in training. So the ones that are left at the end, may be the ones that I'm still allowing to or encouraging to grow more and to thicken trunks or develop more branching, that sort of thing. So I'm not quite as disturbed if I don't get them, because I know that I can grab them at a later point, do the work on them that I need, and then they can go back into that growing phase again. I think that's one of the benefits of having a lot of trees, is that you work with species at all different stages of their development. And as I said before, that I think it's the repetitive nature that I can line up 15, 20 trees on a Sunday morning and put them in the workshop, and if they've all got to have the same work done, then I can get through them, especially if it's a tree in the development stage, and I can get through it pretty fast, as opposed to possibly someone that's maybe got one tree in the development stage and they've got questions on what to do. And that's, I suppose, where people like me and other bonsai professionals where you should be able to get in contact and say, hey, look, I've got a question, what do you think? And you should be able to get an answer pretty quickly from someone to say, hey, yep, I'd do it like this because of this reason, so go for it. And that hopefully provides you with the confidence to keep the tree progressing. The worst thing that you can do, as I said at the start, is to do nothing, and that's for all trees in development. So I might not have time to do everything now, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to get to it. It just means that I am not up against it, not against the clock, like I am when it comes to say decantling black pines or something like that. Where there's a real time frame for what I have to do. Then working on a Shimpaku Juniper like this is nowhere near as time critical as what that is for me. In fact, I don't think there's too many time critical things. Maybe defoliation is a time critical thing because of the remaining time for the tree left to grow new foliage that's been removed. But everything else seems to pretty much squeeze into that. She'll be right, I'll get to it. And as long as you do get to it, then you've pretty much got a season to have it done, as opposed to a day to have something done. All right, I'm right down to the lower branches now, getting to the last part of working on this tree, where it's just working on the last big pads, giving them a nice clean up, and then we'll be right to go. But normally for a tree like this, being it's got maybe 20, 25 pads on it, something like that, and it's about 45 centimetres tall. It's quite thick with foliage. Time-wise, I'd probably leave myself, if I wasn't wiring the tree, if I was just simply doing the cleanup and wire removal like I'm going to do with this one, then I think it'd probably be maybe an hour and a half's work for a tree like this. So that's just something to keep in mind when your collection starts to grow. The more trees you've got, the more advanced they get, the more work they're all going to need. So, picking up 30 young Shimpaku whips tomorrow, wiring them all, the amount of work on them is going to be, maybe 15, 20 minutes, half an hour combined. But you get to 10 years, 11 years down the track like I am with this one, and each one's sort of an hour and a half, or you're not going to get the work done. You're just going to keep skimming past it. It's something that you need to keep in mind, and it's also got to do with bench space. When you first, I'll call you bonsai young. When you're young dealing with bonsai, you can your eyes can be bigger than your belly, and you'll acquire trees left, right, and centre. Every single sale day is an opportunity to go out there and fill benches and to give you a reason to dance around the garden in the morning with the coffee in your hand, which is fantastic. But each one of those trees, the growth doubles on it every year as a guide, and the amount of work needed has to double with it as well. I was having this conversation with a mate the other day, and we were talking about years in bonsai, and I think that one of the misnomers is, of hearing someone say, I've been doing bonsai for 30 years, let's say. I'll just pick that figure because I'm not talking about anyone specific. But, after 30 years in bonsai, you'd gather that they would, one, have a lot of knowledge, and secondly, have some pretty great trees. But that's not always the case, because unless you're working on your trees as a stepping stone, as a path to make them better every time that you work on them, and having clear goals and actually understanding exactly what it is that you're doing with the tree when you're working on the tree. You're not just going through the process for the sake of going through it. You're going through the process because you want to achieve whatever it is. Then 30 years in bonsai can be the equivalent of 3 years for someone who's maybe on a different path and has got guidance and clear objectives and has refined their skills and knowledge to allow them to sort of keep taking progressive steps with their bonsai. Now, not everyone wants to be, ruler of the bonsai world, and that's cool. I don't want that either, but I do want this. I do strive to have a great deal of satisfaction whenever I work on a tree. Like, for instance, this one I'm working on right now, I like that feeling when I put it on the bench after, I water it every day, so I see the thing all the time. But to sit here and pick through its hair and see how it's going and really get close and personal with it and come into contact with it again, and that doesn't happen all that often. It's, as I said, it's probably an hour and a half every year. This thing sits on my bench, and every sort of 3 or 4 years I repot it, and then it's back out there to do what it does, and I let it do what it does and encourage it to do it. So 30 years of not doing the right thing for that hour and a half every year can be pretty disheartening, I think. Every bonsai can be improved. It doesn't matter how old it is, how long you've had it, where it's come from, what it's been up to in its life, what you've been up to. You can always, if you've got the right approach, education's great. You can either go to an education with a closed mind and learn absolutely nothing, or you can go into it with an open mind and say, look, I'm an empty slate, fill me up. How do I get this information? How do I go from this to this? And that's where it's important to pick your educator, pick your source of information. Pick the person that's going to be the guide for you. That one, they've got something going for them that makes you want to aspire to do something with your trees, not mimic, not copy, but that there might be something about the health of the trees, or it could be something that every time you look at the trees, you get inspired, and that's the sort of thing I think that you need to have in the back of your head when you're picking someone for guidance, because it's a big world out there, and there's lots of flashing neon signs. But I think that you just need to be careful, because the last thing that I'd want is for anyone after 30 years to say, I've wasted my bonsai life doing this. That after 30 years, this is how I feel. This is not what I've got, but this is how I feel. I don't feel like my trees have done what they could have done. Whereas I think that you should look back after 30 years and be saying, wow, what a great time I've had. What a good first step in the bonsai journey, because this thing never stops. I tell everybody that that every one of our trees, species dependent, but they really should outsurvive all of us. Everyone that's listening to this, I'm sorry, but I truly hope your trees live a lot longer than me, than all of us. I've still got bucket loads of years left in me, but I look at all of my trees and I work on my trees to the point that, not that old sentimental horse that, a bonsai's never finished. Not interested in that scenario. What I'm interested in is, if I can make them as healthy as I possibly can, then this thing's going to go on forever. And it means that every year I get to have an hour and a half where I sit down at the end of the hour and a half. I can feel very content. And, after a good night's work, I can glad to go in, put my feet up, sit down, grab a beer, and, not necessarily talk about, but maybe bore to tears my loved ones with what I'm feeling and the euphoric state that I get from working on my little trees in pots. This isn't for everybody, but you wouldn't be listening to this if it was, would you? We're all in this together, in this old little nutty bonsai world, whether it's one tree that you've got or it's 10,000. I think we're all into it for exactly the same reason. And if you're not, well, pick another hobby, because it's got to do with trees. If you haven't worked it out, they're it's an art form, and I do think it is an art. That's another kettle of fish, but it is definitely an art form. But it's got to do more with the appreciation of nature and what it is going on around us. And it's not cruel. It's anything but. It's I can't tell you one other plant in my garden. I've got a large garden. I can't tell you one other plant that I sit and smile and talk to and work on and fertilise and look for pests on as much as what I do with my bonsai. Some people I can see they have it with their rose garden or their veggie gardens, and that's great. I get it too from veggies, but I definitely don't get it like I do from trees. There's something about trees. You're walking through a park somewhere, and you stop the one that you're with. Hey, look at that tree. Look at those branches. Look how it forks up there. See how it divides? See how there's no more than 2 branches coming from that spot? That's because of this. See those leaves up there? Oh, look at this, look at that. Look at the root base on that tree. I used to get funny looks, now I just get eye rolls. You'll hear every now and then there's a bigger cut, and that's maybe some of the bigger secondary branches where I look at. I'm working on the structure of the tree as well. So with junipers, it's really easy to do what we call hedge pruning. Now, I don't like hedge pruning. Hedge pruning is where you just simply are making decisions based on shape. So you're looking at a pad and you're saying, okay, pad, I'm going to make you nice and round, and I don't really care about what's going on inside the pad, as long as it looks good for a photo or from a distance, that's really what I'm focusing on. It's just that look good type approach to design. And junipers are really easy to do that. I mean, I wouldn't hedge them because you'll end up with all little brown bits on the end as you cut them with your shears. But as you're pruning one, anyone that's got or ever worked on a juniper will know that they grow really thick, really fast, and they get so dense so fast. So you could simply work it to a shape all the time. But one of the secrets I was taught about bonsai, and I'll let you guys know this as well. One of the secrets to successfully growing any bonsai is inner buds. The only way you're going to get inner buds is to have sunlight coming in, and the only way you're going to get sunlight coming in there is to have a structure or a density of foliage that allows for the sun to come through. I use an approach, it's the hand approach, right? So if I put my hand on the other side of a foliage pad and I can't see my hand, then I know that sunlight can't get through that pad. If sunlight can't get through that pad, you guessed it, foliage won't grow in that area, and eventually you'll get dieback. So not only am I starting with cleaning underneath the pads and then starting to work the shape of the pad, but I'm also looking at the structure of the pads to make sure that they're not just dense mats, but that they've actually got some integrity to them. And by integrity, I mean good branching structure, not too full. Don't have all the foliage at the tips. Try and prune them back further than where I want them to grow to, so it lightens up the load and allows for the foliage to be seen through the other side. When I'm pruning the foliage of the Shimpaku too, I'm only pruning through the stem of the growth. So I'm not cutting through the new growth like you would if you were hedging something. I'm actually just having a look at the growth, seeing where the central stem grows through that foliage, and then just cutting that, and that's allowing me to reduce the height and eliminate some of the foliage that we don't want on this tree. I'd reckon this podcast would be what it is to painters watching their paint dry, listening to someone else click with their scissors in the background while you're otherwise occupied. I reckon that this will be one of those ones people listen to when they can't sleep at night. Just pop on that podcast from Bonsai Matsu, the one where he's working on the Shimpaku. That'd be a great one. You'll be asleep in about 10 minutes. But anyway, I'm enjoying myself, as I always do when I'm working on my trees. Feel it's a privilege to be doing what I'm doing sometimes. It's definitely not taken lightly, and I put a lot of focus onto how I can pass on as much information as I possibly can to as many people as possible, because it's one of those things that once you open the can of worms of learning about bonsai, it's never enough. Never ever enough. Alright, last one to go. So now that's it. The tree's been given a yearly clean-up. It's had the wire removed from off the branches, while most of the heavy wire I've left. One of the approaches I use to wire removal is I always have in the back of my head, I don't really want to be wiring this thing over and over and over. So my approach is to put on serious wire for serious bends and then leave it on as long as I possibly can. So it just starts to cut in a little bit, leaves a little bit of scarring, but it's not going to do permanent damage. So what I've done now is I've removed the wire off the primary branches, so the big heavy wire that was on going around the trunk and that sort of thing. But the wire that extends out those primary branches to the secondary branches, most of that I've left intact because it hasn't swollen in those areas as yet. So it's something that I'll keep an eye on over the next 6 months just to see how it progresses. But I don't want to have to remove the wire then reapply the wire. So I find by removing the wire that's causing the issue, that's starting to cut in around the tree. By getting rid of that, then I don't have to worry about it for elsewhere on the tree. I can leave it on a little bit longer. It's a bit more effective, a bit more efficient with the use of my time as well. Tree looks great. Really happy with it. Like I said, I'll put a couple of photos up on Instagram and Facebook for everyone to have a look at after you go back to once you've listened to this podcast. So it's early February in 2021. If you sort of scale back through the photos, you'll get to see the tree that we're talking about. But it's all come on nicely, and this is I thought this would be an interesting refresher on the podcast itself, to work on a tree and actually delve into a little bit deeper. I started with it last year with the black pine story, talking about the history of it and that sort of thing, but I thought this would go one step further, where I was talking about what I was thinking and what my approach was at the time of actually working on the tree itself. So you get a bit of a bit of a show and tell with more telling, obviously, and a bit of showing somewhere down the track through the social media side of things, so you can look back and review it as well. I thought that would be an interesting way for you guys to engage and maybe get some insight onto what's going through this crazy head of mine most of the time. So thank you for joining in. Thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. The podcast, this is its third year now. So time flies in bonsai. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It just goes so bloody fast. So I don't profess to be the most regular podcast uploader, but I try and make it that it's something that you're going to hopefully want to listen to when you get the chance to do it. So please stay in touch as always. The usual Instagram, Facebook, email scott@bonsaimatsu.com, via the website. Whatever I can help with, please shoot me a message and I'll do my damnedest to answer you and provide you with whatever insight I possibly can whenever I can. That's a promise. It's been great. I'm glad we're back. 2021 is certainly feeling like we've turned the corner, especially here in Australia and certain other places around the world. It's still tough times. We're not out of the woods yet, but let's make sure we focus on our bonsai and continue going forward in a very, very positive manner. And I'll catch you at the next podcast. Thanks for listening in. See you later.